Welcome everyone to the Culture and Faith panel for BooksDotCon. As a start, could you introduce yourselves and, if you're comfortable with it, could you speak a bit about how you identify culturally and religiously?
Sure. My name is Catherine Locke. I'm the author of Second Position, Finding Center, and upcoming The Girl with the Red Balloon. And I am Jewish. I am a Reform Jew.
Okay.
Hi, I'm KM. I am Muslim and I write middle grade at this moment as Karuna Riazi. My debut middle grade is coming out in 2017 from Salam Reads.
Hi, I'm Nita. I'm a United Methodist. That's about it.
Rin?
Oh, sorry. I'm Rin Chupeco, and I'm the author of The Girl from the Well. And I am a Filipino Chinese currently living in the Philippines, and I am a Catholic.
Okay. Have you based your work on your own experiences?
The Girl with the Red Balloon is about a girl who accidentally time travels to East Berlin, 1988 East Berlin, and gets caught up in a magical conspiracy, but it's told overlapping with how her grandfather escaped from death camps. And the reason I wrote it is because my grandfather was a liberator of death camps, and all of my family that remained in Europe died in the Holocaust. And as a result, my family has a pretty complex relationship with Germany, and that's why I started to write the book. So Ellie's experience in the book pulls a lot from my own feelings about memory and forgiveness and how we deal with mass tragedy and genocide centuries and generations later, or decades and generations later. But Ellie is much more religious than I am. And the second book that I'm writing that I super can't talk a lot about right now is about an American Jewish girl during the 1940s in the United States and her experience. And she was not religious at the start of the book, and she becomes more religious because of what she experiences in the book. And that is closer to my experience. In terms of I have become more observant as I have grown older than I was as a young teenager. So in that way, it does pull for me.
All right, is it my turn?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, so as it's almost kind of obvious, but my debut is under Salam Reads, which is a Muslim-focused imprint because it is about a young Muslim girl who is 12 years old, and she is very much own voices because she's Bangladeshi American like me, and she is a Muslim like me. So I won't lie and say that, you know, a lot of my own voice and experiences haven't like colored Farah and her world and how she reacts to things. But there are things that I've tried to expand outside of my own experience. And this is like a little rant I often do, like, you know, in my experiences on Twitter and as a Muslim moderator for the Tumblr blog, Writing with Color, that, you know, Islam is not a monolith. It is a faith, but it has so much diversity and like individual practices that, you know, just even my voice, I feel really inadequate to say my voice is like the one definite voice on Muslims. I just happen to be really loud about my experiences online. So yeah, I definitely do write about myself, and Farah in particular, she has a lot of myself in her.
Okay. So I grew up and still live in the Bible Belt of the United States. My whole family is from the rural South, so Christianity is always kind of there's a church about on every block in the city I live in. It's a little, I want to say it's a little much, but yeah. So not a lot, but the book I'm working on now deals with the intersections of queerness and faith, particularly within Christianity, as that's something that we're continually struggling with, and within the Methodist Church. We actually just finished our general conference, which is the giant worldwide conference of Methodists, and that was this summer, and there's language in our book of discipline that says that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and we've been trying for years to get that language changed, and we thought it would happen in 2012 and it didn't, and this year we thought it would happen again, and they reached like a stalemate or something, and they still haven't changed the language in the book of discipline. So a lot of what I'm currently working on deals with being queer and Christian in the South, and kind of how to navigate both of those identities, because sometimes people think they're not like mutually exclusive. Like you can't be both. You can't be.
Well, for me, I was born and raised in the Philippines, and I've lived here all my life. And we are actually like one of the most conservative Catholic nations in Asia, in that we have no divorce laws, we have very, very little in terms of reproductive health rights, in terms of, for women, so it's always been hard. And, I was baptized as a Catholic, but, my experiences has kind of made me move towards the lapsed Catholic stage, mostly because I live in a country with no divorce rights, no reproductive health rights. So that probably has something to do with the kind of the slowly lack of faith that I'm starting to get. Although I do appreciate a lot of the things that the Philippines has, in that, for the most part, like Christians and Muslims, we have Muslims here, but further down south, and we're actually pretty peacefully coexisting, despite the sort of contradictory nature. And I can say that we're actually doing a lot better than in a lot of the first world countries in terms of cooperation and communication between different religions here. And also, my grandparents actually came from China, and they came to the Philippines to kind of escape the cultural revolution that was taking place there. And so you can say that I'm a minority in a place where that's already considered a minority in a lot of other countries. So it's a weird place to be in, and it's always been very difficult to be considered like a foreigner in the country that you kind of grew up in. So I take that sense of, sometimes that sense of alienation and that sense of isolation, and try to find like the bright side in all of those things. And those are usually the concepts that I try to incorporate in my books, in that, just because people are saying that, yeah, you don't look like a lot of the other people here, it's important for me to express how closely you can still identify with another culture and with another religion, despite being, despite being the outsider. How people view you as an outsider, and it's important to get that perspective into the culture or the religion that you're living in.
Although we are starting to see more diverse books culturally, there's still a certain lack of representation of religion and faith in YA fiction. Why do you think that is?
That's a tough question. In that, I think we're taught, politics and religion are the things that you're told not to discuss in polite company. I also think that marginalized or minority religions, at least in the United States. So I'm not talking about globally because that would change the numbers on this, but at least in the United States, minority religions really have to work to protect ourselves and protect our communities. There's this weird thing that happens in the United States about assimilation and religion, and you're either supposed to assimilate completely and lose your other religion and be American, which is considered Christian, or if you're not going to do that, you're considered like not fully assimilated. I'm sure Kay can speak to this as well, but I know that it happens with Judaism, and I think another factor for Jewish people is that historically it hasn't gone very well for us when we historically we haven't fared well in times of conflict and when we've been openly Jewish. So I know that Jewish friends of mine are not comfortable writing Jews into their books, and they're not comfortable talking about being Jewish, or they're not comfortable being on a list of Jewish writers because of a historical component and collective memory that's happening. So I think that that's part of it. I also think that there's such a wide range of how people practice religion that I feel pressure personally in, the way I write Judaism into my books is going to be some readers' first interaction with Judaism, and it might be the way that they see, like, all Jews practice this way. But there are a lot of different ways to practice faith, and I don't want my story to represent all stories in Judaism, and I think that's a key.
Okay, so we were talking about why faith is not represented. I was trying to just understand. Okay, all right. So, I mean, speaking as a Muslim is a really, really fraught thing to talk about Muslim representation right now. It's like one of those things where I remember, I always bring this up, but I think last year, Shannon Hale, who is wonderful, had this whole, faith in YA and kid lit discussion on Twitter, and people were furious, and I think they took it as, we need more Christianity, but the point is that, there are faiths that are marginalized that have to be talked about, because otherwise we have to rely on this representation that's primarily designed to make people think that it's okay to kill us, totally dehumanizing us. And I'm sorry to take it so dark at 11:30 in the morning, but that's really what's our reality is right now. And I know that my editor Zareen, she started Salam Reads at this point because she felt like Muslim kids needed this space where the representation is positive. You can look and you can be like, Salam Reads thinks about us and cares about us as people, and not just these disembodied, villainized people that you see in the headlines that live next door and you never know when they're going to explode, which is kind of sad. It's something that you internalize very easily and very quickly. And it made it personally hard for me for years to try and write about a Muslim, because it felt like, there is a dominant narrative, and it often felt hopeless, even trying to take that narrative back, because it's so well built, it feels like at this point, that, it's hard to fight back, even if it's your own story, your own voice, and that's not how it is. It's very hard to, challenge that. But recently I felt a lot more hopeful about it, and it's really something. I don't think the Kay of 2 years ago would know that, she would be writing a middle grade, and she'd be able to make all these little jokes, and she'd be discussing with Danielle and Sona, who are amazing, that, I made this little inside joke here, is that okay? And it's yes, that's great, and, not expecting that I could weave in all these references and have them stay in, because you kind of expect that they're going to be taken out, they're going to be challenged. It's going to be like, well, we know you're really not like that.
Right.
I think Katie and Kay have done a really good job hitting the nail on the head with this one. For me, what I've kind of seen from growing up in a very Christian perspective is like we have Christian bookstores and we have like Lifeway or Cokesbury and we have Barnes and Noble, and the two very rarely interact in terms of fiction. They're like Christian and YA or books aimed at Christian books for teens tend to be very moralistic and very preachy and very like they're not about the story, they're about the lesson that is supposed to be contained within them, which actually still makes me really hesitant to pick up any book with a Christian main character or that talks about having Christian characters, because my first instinct is immediately to wonder if I'm going to be preached at through the book instead of told a story. I feel like we're kind of sort of maybe moving away from that a little bit. I know Meredith Russo's If I Was Your Girl did a really great job with religion in the book, and J. Robin Brown's upcoming Georgia Peaches and Other Forbidden Fruit did a really, really excellent job incorporating Christianity and that queer perspective, and it wasn't preachy at all. But it's also, for me, like getting over that mental hurdle that's like, oh, including Christian characters in this book is automatically going to make it really preachy, and or reading something with that is, especially because with the queer community and with Christians, there is overlap, but the immediate reaction from me as a queer person, especially because we've been so persecuted in as far as by Christians in this country, especially like notably if you look at the Westboro Baptist Church and stuff like that, there's this gut reaction for me as a queer person to be like, oh, I don't want to read anything with Christianity because I'm probably going to be told that my lifestyle is incompatible or something like that. So I'm trying to still navigate. I think we need like more of that representation of navigating those identities, and like especially in regards to Christianity, making sure it's not or incorporating it without it feeling super preachy or like only being sold in the Christian bookstore section of Christian book section of Barnes and Noble.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've had sort of a similar experience regarding that, because here in the Philippines, there's not really much separation right now between church and state, because the church really loves to meddle in issues that are not necessarily something they should be meddling with in the first place. So it causes a lot of problems with government, and there's a lot of things here that we should already be having and are constantly being denied. So when it comes down to it, I think when it comes to religion in literature, a lot of people don't want to write that because it stems from a desire not to give offense. Because I do believe that everyone has different ways of finding their own peace, and but everybody would probably protest if, like, when religion inserts itself into your own life in a way that you don't want it to. So in the same way, when you're reading something about literature and there comes and in it is a religion that you may not necessarily agree with, or a religion you might not necessarily know, it might come off as sounding preachy because mileage might vary. For like what's reasonable for one person reading it might not be the same. Might be the same kind of reasonable explanations of religion when it comes to another person who's reading that same book. So it's really a desire, I guess, to shy away from controversy, because in the long run, religion is a really, really touchy subject. At least it is here, which is why, for the most part, I kind of trying not to explicitly introduce religion into the things that I write, but that might also be because there's not a lot of good experiences when it comes to religion where I live. So uh, I'm not sure how deeply ingrained Christianity is in the United States, but it's very deeply ingrained here. So, any kind of like saying something that most religious people here don't like gives rise to a lot of criticism. So, to err on the safe side, a lot of people just choose not to talk about it at all.
As far as being dominant, it varies from region to region. Like especially down south, it is far more dominant within the culture as well than it is in other parts of the United States.
Yeah, I feel like the Philippines is like Asia's rural south when you think about it.
And even where there's representation, a lot of times it's hurtful and this is disrespectful. Why? Is it just a reflection of the lack of diversity in the publishing market, or is it something more ingrained, something else?
I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with this. I think it's more ingrained with Jewish rep. I think that frequently there's a undercurrent of anti-Semitism in portrayals of Jewish characters, less in young adult than in adult books. There just isn't enough Jewish characters that happen in young adult for me to really speak to that. In most of the ones that happen, it's mentioned once or twice, but they aren't. Judaism is not a daily part of that character's life, which is fine. That's how a lot of American Jews do live, so that is an authentic portrayal. But bad representation, I think, is frequently very deliberate. And when it's not deliberate, it's unconscious, internalized anti-Semitism from our culture. And I'm sure Kay also has lots to say about that one.
All right, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question properly because I'm multitasking here, so which I know I should not be doing, but
Don't worry. The question was, even where there is representation, a lot of times it's hurtful and disrespectful. Why is this? Is it just a reflection of the lack of diversity in the publishing market, or is it something more ingrained, something else?
I would say it's both. Like, okay, I'm not going to go there because I promised myself that it's going to burn a bridge, so I'm not going to go there. But I think it's both. I think that we really need more like diverse gatekeepers, first of all, which is one of the reasons why even before my book was picked for Salam Reads, I was so enthusiastic about it because it's an actual Muslim gatekeeper who's doing her best with what she has to, like, open the space and be able to vet the titles to come through it. And that's really a lot because, as we've seen recently, there are some titles that get through because there aren't diverse gatekeepers there to catch it and be like, okay, whoa, this is not what we need here. Like, you need someone there who's not going to be like, well, since we don't have, for instance, like, a book about Muslims, this is probably okay. Particularly when it's someone who's writing from outside the faith, which I know a lot of people aren't always happy to hear, but I'm sorry. Katie, I see you're just like, Katie's just going hard now. She's like, we're talking about you. But, it's really hard when it's someone from outside the faith in particular. And then, like, ingrained, that's also on the same scale. Like, if you look at the hashtag I'm trying to multitask with right now, a lot of Muslim bloggers I know are already saying that when your religion has such an ingrained, like, expectation and stereotypes around it, it gets even hard to, like, talk honestly about your own, like, internal community discussions. Like a few times recently this month, I've tried to have a community discussion, and instantly people from outside the faith were all over it and going, yes, see, this is the problem. And it's like, no, it is not. This is something we're trying to address on our own space, and you can't instantly come in and start saying, yes, this is exemplary of what we expect of you. It's no, it's not. And so particularly with Islam right now, it's bad representation is the dominant representation, and it's gotten to the point where I'm like, look, if you're going to give us bad representation, just don't give us at all and let us handle it, because it's really gotten to that point where it's sad, but unless it's a Muslim author, I get very, very cynical, and I very much let's wait and see. I can't approve this. I've made the mistake of approving a few times ahead of time just because I was excited, and then I get the book and I'm just like, how am I going to say now that I really don't see this going over? And then there's the added complication of so many Muslims that feel differently or practice differently. By and large on stereotypes we're all united, but then on practice it's very hard, and that's why we need more representation. Because for instance, I have a really good friend, and probably all of you know her, that she's from a different, her family's from a different sect and a different belief within Islam than mine. So sometimes I answer something on Writing with Color, and she's like, later we'll talk about it, and she'll be like, well, that's not what my family thinks. And that's the other thing about being hard. And I feel like I've really gone off topic, but part of the complicated thing with Islam is that our representation is so limited right now, and there's so much more that we need to be addressing. But because of bad representation and it being internalized and not having enough diverse people in the industry to be able to pull hard in our corner, sometimes it's very, very difficult, and it really gets my goat, which is why I've been just going on like this.
I think for...
Oh no.
Oops, we lost Nita. Rin, do you want to say something while we wait for Nita?
All right. I'll try to make it quick. Right now, I think the main problem when it comes to that is
I don't know what just happened.
Don't worry.
Do you want to go ahead, or should I?
You can go ahead.
All right. All right. I think the main problem is the concept of a default race or a default religion, because I've lived in the Philippines my whole life, and I've never set foot in the United States save for maybe a couple of weeks or so on a visit. But we have a lot of American media coming over here, because we're really we're the world's capital when it comes to social media users, and we absorb a lot of stuff on the internet, for good or for ill. And a lot of the things that the sort of subversive things that we see coming from a lot of American media, from the news to TV programs and everything, is that they are still in many ways the default race or the default religion, so to speak, and we sort of get the impression that, hey, we're here, where the Filipinos are obviously the most dominant race in the Philippines, but in that certain sense, they're still telling us that we are, even in our own country, even with our own religions, we're still somehow the other race or the other religion, and that everything defaults back to them. So it's a very disheartening kind of concept to process, and that's kind of why there's a little bit of a growing subset of writers here that are really into representation and are really into thinking about Filipino things. They want to see more Filipinos. They want to see more Filipinos represented in their literature. They want to see more Filipinos in other aspects. We're really, really, proud whenever a Filipino or somebody in the Philippines like reaches like international status, because that's our way of kind of putting ourselves out there and saying, hey, we're just as good as you guys. So, you know, give us representation of our own, and you know, we need to get rid of this notion of a default race and understand that everybody is different. And while they might be different, there's no one race or one religion that's really supposed to be better than the other.
Okay, so hopefully I won't get kicked off the chat this time. I don't think in the United States in particular Christianity suffers from a lack of representation. It is the dominant, almost, especially where I live, the expected religion down here. Like my partner in high school was singing at something, and she's agnostic, and a guy comes up to her and asks if she sings in church. Like, that is the automatically expected in the South. You go to church. So I don't think we suffer from a lack of representation so much as maybe a lack of nuance, or I don't want to say diversity, but I think nuance is the word I'm looking for, because like there are so many different denominations of Christianity, and we all don't practice the same way. Like Methodists and Baptists and Presbyterians like don't practice the same way. We actually joke about how different Methodists and Baptists are, but down here, and there's just like, if you don't, like, there's this assumption that all Christianity is really similar to Baptists for some reason, and we're not. Like, there are very different distinctions, especially with how we deal with issues of race or queerness or other intersectionalities as well. So I would like to see, there was something that mentioned, I was reading that mentioned a character was Methodist, but the way the character reacted and like how they performed in different situations was not generally my experience of Methodism, and that, not that my experience is like the one experience, but there are commonalities within the denomination. And it was, to me, it was very clear that the author had just picked some random Christian denomination and tried to fit their ideas of what Christian denomination is without doing the research into the differences between.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh.
We lost her again.
She'll come back.
Okay, let's go to the next question, which is a hard one, I know, but what are the difficulties of discussing the lack of representation of faith? I know Kay has spoken a little about this, but I'm sure you have a lot to say about it.
I just keep thinking how much trouble I can get in. I think when we have minority and marginalized religion discussions, they tend to get co-opted by. We tried to have a diverse religion chat on Twitter one time, and it was quickly co-opted by minority Christians. Yeah. Christians that felt like they were minorities, so they might live in a Catholic-dominated area and they were Methodist, or they lived in the Bible Belt and they were Catholic. And even though they may feel like they are minorities in their area and how they practice Christianity, they are not a marginalized religion, even in that area. So I think that tends to happen a lot when we try to discuss religion. And then there's an intersectionality thing that I wish we discussed more, is the intersections of faith and sexual orientation, or faith and gender identity. faith and race, I think those are really important discussions that we don't get to have a lot. And I think that there's just a lot of complicated things about religion to discuss in public. I think the most comfortable spaces are we, formed a private Facebook group, discussed faith there, compiled it into a transcript, and then Dahlia Adler put it on her blog. And that was a safe space because no one could come in and say, you're interpreting it differently. I've never, discriminated against Jewish or Muslim people in my life, because people tend to, religion is such a personal thing that people tend to take hurts by other people who tend to personalize it. So if I say I have experienced discrimination because I am a Jewish person in the United States, people will say, no, you haven't. Because they're taking it personally, like they personally have discriminated against me, which is not what I'm saying. But because religion's such a personal thing, that once you say, I have been discriminated by a Christian person, they're like, oh, this is about me. So it's hard to separate personal feelings from discussions about religion. And I think I rambled, but I think that's all I have.
I literally told Diana the other day in the email, I said, me and Katie are going to have things to say about that failed Twitter chat and how upsetting it was, and how it took taking a private group of people on Facebook, marginalized people who knew how not to talk over each other, for it to actually be successful. That still really upsets me, and I wish I had said things that night that I probably would have regretted the next morning. But I remember one highlight, not that it relates to Islam, but one highlight was Debbie Reese, who is Native, talking about how Native religions were like quashed by Christianity, and this Catholic author coming to her and saying, well, I have this book about how Native Americans were converted, and Debbie was just like, she just messaged me and she's like, did you see that? And I was just like, this is not what we are talking about here. That was just like literally, I know it didn't have to be secondhand embarrassment, but it was secondhand embarrassment. I'm sorry. I was just like... It
felt like that chat turned into something where we had to defend the fact that we existed instead of discussing like our religion and depictions of it. It was pretty bad.
So in any case, I agree with Katie's point that it's really upsetting that we have to constantly defend our existence and constantly have to carve out this space and have people upset with Shannon because she tried to open up the floor to talk about faith representation. Everybody was instantly like, that's not what we need. We don't need kids being preached to about religion. And that's really not what it is. And I've said before, but if you say that someone's faith doesn't color their everyday lives, you are totally going to be lying. To me, my faith and what's for instance, as horrible as it is, how my faith is being represented on the news means how comfortable I am going to be around living my daily life outside, how comfortable I'm going to be on campus, what's going to be playing on the TVs when I'm waiting in the room, who's going to be staring at me more than usual, because staring is a daily part of my existence, but there's staring that you can feel, all right, it's daily staring, and then there's just should I be holding my bag and getting ready to leave this area, So it's kind of understanding that, all right, for you it might not be crucial to see this faith in this book, but for me it is part of normalizing who I am and reclaiming the narrative. And at the risk of putting in too many Hamilton references, I'm really all about writing ourselves back into the narrative. And, being able to claim that back for ourselves is so important and so crucial at this point. And I really, I know everybody knows I was probably really emotional my book announcement day, but I got particularly emotional because two Bengali American bloggers I know messaged me to let me know that, as soon as the book's on pre-order, their cousin really needs it or their little sister really needs it. And it's a lot of pressure. It's really going to be a lot of pressure. I talked to I call her my big sister, but author Aisha Saeed, and she was telling me how so many girls found written in the stars important, even if there was a little bit of community upset, and there still is, that, like, how can you write an arranged marriage when this is something that's already, you know, unfortunately associated with us, and how could you do that as someone as a member of the community? And it's like such a hard thing, because we really should have more, and we really shouldn't have to carry the position of, for instance, like writing one of the, I don't know if it's the first, I wouldn't dare to claim I'm the first, but writing a young Bangladeshi American girl, just having normal adventures and happening to wear a hijab like me, that shouldn't be something that you have to carry all the responsibility of being the first. Being the first is not actually as cool, because you're breaking through and trying to figure out how to make it better for everybody else, and worrying if you misstep, you feel like this is going to be more internalized, um, assumptions about you from people who don't understand already. And it's just another thing that upsets me about these conversations, because you want to be honest, you want to talk to other people who understand how it is, and you have people who, unfortunately do not understand, and I wish I could make them understand how blessed they are to not have to worry about things like this. Like, I know Katie knows, the late night trolls, and, well, here's what I should tell you as a little misinformed woman about your faith at 12 midnight when you want to go to bed. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to stay in your mentions until tomorrow morning. Thankfully, some people don't have to live with that, but I want to make it easier for the people who do. And that's something that we really need to be able to have these conversations, so we can talk and figure out how to make it better for the people who go through it all the time. And I rambled, I'm sorry.
I think Kay and Katie said it perfectly. And I think, too, watching that faith chat happen from afar, afar from my computer screen, yeah, Christians in the United States need to recognize that our voice is the loudest, and that we're not a marginalized religion in the slightest, and that we probably shouldn't talk all the time. And on that note,
well, for my part, I can only speak as an outsider looking in, and like I mentioned before, that Filipino Christians and Filipino Muslims, for the most part, actually coexist pretty peacefully here, and this is despite the fact that there's a version, our local version of the Al Qaeda in the South, which is kind of scary in a lot of ways, but what a lot of us, a lot of Filipino Christians here understand is that the extremists that are, claiming Allah in their name is very different from the average Muslim, and that's something that we really do understand. And sometimes we turn on the TV and we look at American news media, and then we see the weirdness going on there, all these finger pointing and blaming, when they themselves are actually more of the enemy than the other cultures are. We can only really just shake our heads and say, for the most part, I'm sorry if I offend anybody, but what are these assholes thinking? Why can't they see that if they're gonna base somebody else's religion according to the extremists in that religion, and then by their own logic, they're the worst terrorists ever, at least in these modern times. And it's kind of frustrating, because we're, like I said, we're on the outside looking in, and we can't really do much other than say pretty much what the rest of the world is thinking. That why do you guys still have this? I mean, a lot in a lot of other places it's been resolved, or at least it's not to that extreme that you guys are facing. And if we people who are conservative Christians are able to learn how to coexist with our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters, and why can't you guys? And on that part, like if Kay or anybody else ever finds themselves in the Philippines, I would be more than happy to like show you guys around and see how for all our like our weirdness and all the faults that we do have here, that's at least one thing we score over the United States. I'm really sorry that you guys actually have to go through something like that. It's not something that we have to think about personally, like here living here in the Philippines.
Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of more time, but could you recommend some books you personally think are good representations of faith and culture in YA fiction?
Sure. I am not Orthodox, but this book was super fun, super lovely, and has been vetted by Orthodox Jewish friends. So Suri Rosen's Playing with Matches is a really fun, fluffy, family-oriented sister relationship YA contemporary. And I really enjoyed Scarlett Epstein Hates It Here, in which Scarlett is not super religious. She mentions it once or twice, but it does inform kind of her moral compass and how she reorients herself in the world after she screws up a couple of times. It's also a really great book about fandom and friendship that I really liked.
With me, it's a little harder because there are so few of us still. Aisha Saeed's Written in the Stars, and anything Aisha writes is really, like, important. I'm one of the co-founders of the Muslim Squad, and we're trying our best to make a list on our website of different fiction from Muslim writers, from like kidlit to adult. Right now, I think we're working on the adult list first because that's where we had the most submissions. But if anybody wanted to just check there, we're still like vetting it ourselves, but at least it's like on the whole own voices, so there's a little bit more like confidence in being able to recommend those type of stories. I also have a post over at the Teen Librarian Toolbox. I will warn you that at least one title on there that I recommended, I did note that it was forthcoming and I hadn't read it yet, but now I really don't like it. And it's that title that I always mention that I'm always worried to talk about because I know that other people who have talked about it have had unpleasant experiences trying to explain why they didn't like it, and it's other like relatively established people in the industry who are having troubles like addressing it because there's kind of some hostility addressing it. But also there's that post too, and I think there are a few Muslim authors on there. But yeah, really there are not enough Muslims in YA yet, or Muslim stories, like accurate Muslim stories in YA. So this is like a work in progress sort of thing.
I mentioned these two earlier, but I'll just bring them up again. Meredith Russo's If I Was Your Girl did a really excellent job at showing particularly Southern culture and also faith and queerness within the South, which obviously is something that's very close to me. And seconding on that vein, J. Robin Brown's Georgia Peaches and Other Forbidden Fruit, which is forthcoming. It comes out in September. It's about a Christian girl who moves from Atlanta to very rural Georgia, and her dad is a pastor, and she kind of has to go back in the closet a bit, but she develops a crush on this girl, and it's just a really cute, really important queer book that also deals with Christianity without recognizing Christianity and making it so you can't be queer and Christian at the same time.
Well, I'm not sure if this is going to be published internationally, but it's really it's a really big book that's coming out here locally, and there's actually going to be a local movie that's going to be based on it. But there's this female writer named F.H. Batacan, and she has this book called Smaller and Smaller Circles, which is pretty much about two Jesuit priests who are like investigating a series of crimes across the city of Manila. and it's a really, really good look at how, the sort of, not just the grittiness and the kind of urban decay sort of concept in Manila, but it also deals with like two priests and their faiths and how they're able to kind of still keep that faith that everybody has a good side to them, while at the same time tracking down these serial killers that are leaving like these really grotesque killings all across Manila, and it's a really good look into the mind of the average Filipino, how they deal with their culture, how they deal with a lot of the bad things that might happen to them in the city, and how they still kind of keep their religious and their cultural identity even as they go through all these problems and rash of crimes that is sadly pretty common here. So it's a very I mean I don't usually recommend like a lot of religious themes in my book, particularly when it's Christian, because I tend to be really critical of it, given what my own experience is here. But this one was really good, and it kind of captures, I guess, the average Filipino mind. So if you want to really experience Filipino life, that's the book to go to.
Okay, so unfortunately we have to end this panel now. I wanted to thank you all for being here and for being so amazing and talking about all of this. Really, really thank you. I really appreciate it. So I think we have to end this panel now, unfortunately, but we will see you on the next one. So goodbye and thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome everyone to the Culture and Faith panel for BooksDotCon. As a start, could you introduce yourselves, and if you're comfortable with it, could you speak a bit about how you identify culturally and religiously?
Sure. My name is Catherine Locke. I'm the author of Second Position, Finding Center, and upcoming The Girl with the Red Balloon. And I am Jewish. I am a Reform Jew.
Okay.
Hi, I'm KM. I am Muslim and I write middle grade at this moment as Karuna Riazi. My debut middle grade is coming out in 2017 from Salam Reads.
Hi, I'm Nita. I'm a United Methodist. That's about it.
Rin?
Oh, sorry. I'm Rin Chupeco, and I'm the author of
which is a Muslim-focused imprint because it is about a young Muslim girl who is 12 years old, and she is very much own voices because she's Bangladeshi American like me, and she is a Muslim like me. So I won't lie and say that a lot of my own voice and experiences haven't like colored Farah and her world and how she reacts to things. But there are things that I've tried to expand outside of my own experience. And this is like a little rant I often do, like, in my experiences on Twitter and as a Muslim moderator for the Tumblr blog, Writing with Color, that, Islam is not a monolith. It is a faith, but it has so much diversity and individual practices that just even my voice, I feel really inadequate to say my voice is like the one definite voice on Muslims. I just happen to be really loud about my experiences online. So, yeah, I definitely do write about myself, and Farah in particular.
Memory and forgiveness and how we deal with mass tragedy and genocide centuries and generations later, or decades and generations later. But Ellie is much more religious than I am. And the second book that I'm writing that I super can't talk a lot about right now is about an American Jewish girl during the 1940s in the United States and her experience. and she was not religious at the start of the book, and she becomes more religious because of what she experiences in the book, and that is closer to my experience in terms of I have become more observant as I have grown older than I was as a young teenager. So in that way, it does pull for me.
All right, is it my turn?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right, so as it's almost kind of obvious, but my debut is under Salam Reed's
Girl from the Well, and I am a Filipino Chinese currently living in the Philippines, and I am a Catholic.
Okay. Have you based your work on your own experiences?
The Girl with the Red Balloon is about a girl who accidentally time travels to East Berlin, 1988 East Berlin, and gets caught up in a magical conspiracy, but it's told overlapping with how her grandfather escaped from death camps. And the reason I wrote it is because my grandfather was a liberator of death camps, and all of my family that remained in Europe died in the Holocaust. And as a result, my family has a pretty complex relationship with Germany, and that's why I started to write the book. So Ellie's experience in the book pulls a lot from my own feelings about...
She has a lot of myself in her.
Okay. So I grew up and still live in the Bible Belt of the United States. My whole family is from the rural South, so Christianity is always kind of there. Like, there's a church about on every block in the city I live in. It's a little, I want to say it's a little much, but yeah. So not a lot, but the book I'm working on now deals with the intersections of queerness and faith, particularly within Christianity, as that's something that we're continually struggling with, and within the Methodist Church. We actually just finished our general conference, which is the giant worldwide conference of Methodists, and that was this summer, and there's language in our book of discipline that says that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and we've been trying for years to get that language